The following days were filled with tension and whispers throughout the palace. Ethan's choice to stand with Princess Lyra sent ripples through Valoria's noble houses. Some nobles were furious, seeing it as an insult to tradition, while others were quietly curious, wondering what a human could possibly contribute to their world. Lyra, however, remained steadfast. She had chosen Ethan not for his status, but for his heart and mind. That was enough for her, and it seemed that Ethan's determination matched hers. Ethan spent his days learning the ways of Valoria, from the strict codes of conduct to the complex political structures that governed the planet. He was observant and patient, always asking questions, always learning. Though he was a stranger to this world, he refused to be passive. He wanted to understand, to contribute, and to prove that humans were more than their reputation suggested. For Lyra, watching him adapt so quickly and thoughtfully was a relief. She had feared that bringing a human into her life would be a mistake, a liability. Instead, she found herself impressed and inspired by his determination and ingenuity. But not everyone was so welcoming. The council, in particular, had been vocal about their displeasure. They demanded that Ethan prove his worth, insisting that a human could never stand as a partner to a princess of Valoria. Lyra knew that she could not allow the council to humiliate him or force him to submit to some cruel test of tradition. Yet she also understood that the people needed to see his strength, not just to accept him as her husband, but to believe that Valoria could survive and thrive in a changing world. That challenge came sooner than expected. The council decreed that Ethan would face the trial of worth, an ancient Valorian ritual designed to test courage, intelligence, and resourcefulness. The arena was a massive dome, its walls high and lined with tiers where citizens could watch the trial unfold. Dangerous beasts, puzzles, and treacherous landscapes were part of the ordeal, and failure usually meant death, or at the very least, public humiliation. For a human untrained in Valorian combat or survival skills, the task seemed impossible. Ethan, however, did not falter. He spent the night before the trial studying the arena's schematics, which Lyra had provided, and crafting makeshift tools and strategies. He knew he could not rely on strength alone. He would have to use his mind, his ingenuity, and his understanding of physics to survive. As he prepared, Lyra watched silently, her heart heavy with worry but also filled with pride. She had never doubted that he would face the challenge, but she feared the consequences if he failed. When the trial began, Ethan was led into the arena alone. The gate slammed shut behind him with a deafening clang. Immediately, mechanical traps and hostile creatures sprang into action. Ethan moved cautiously, studying every movement, predicting every pattern. He used the debris scattered across the arena, rocks, fallen beams, discarded weapons to create barricades and traps for the beasts. Each challenge tested his wits more than his strength, and he met each one with careful thought and patience. The audience watched in stunned silence as the human navigated the arena. Some gasped when he outsmarted a creature much larger and stronger than him. Others muttered among themselves, questioning whether this human could really survive. But with every obstacle, Ethan proved that his resourcefulness was not just enough. It was extraordinary. He did not fight for glory. He fought for survival and for the trust Lyra had placed in him. Hours passed, and the trial grew more dangerous. The arena shifted into different environments. A scorching desert with sandstorms, a flooded chamber filled with aggressive aquatic creatures, and a labyrinth of jagged rocks where every step could trigger a deadly trap. Ethan adapted to each environment, using clever solutions rather than brute force. He rigged levers to redirect flooding water, fashioned nets to capture creatures, and even created smoke signals to disorient aggressive opponents. Each success drew a mix of awe and disbelief from the audience, many of whom had underestimated humans entirely. Finally, Ethan reached the last challenge, a chasm too wide to jump and too deep to climb. Across it, the final gate awaited, marking the end of the trial. The audience held its collective breath. Many thought it impossible. But Ethan, ever the problem solver, surveyed the chasm. Using materials from the arena, he built a pulley system and rope bridge, carefully testing its stability before crossing. With slow, deliberate steps, he navigated the bridge, his focus absolute. When he finally reached the other side, the gates opened and the crowd erupted into astonished applause. Lyra, who had been watching from above, felt tears prick her eyes. The human she had chosen, the one who had arrived as a stranger and outsider, had not only survived but excelled. He had proven his courage, intelligence, and determination, not in the way Valorians had expected, but in a way that showed the power of human ingenuity and spirit. For the first time, many in the crowd began to see that value was not defined by heritage or tradition alone. The council, initially rigid and unyielding, had no choice but to acknowledge Ethan's achievement. One by one, they stepped forward, offering formal recognition of his success. Some were reluctant, others sincere, but all agreed that a human who could navigate the trial of worth with such intelligence and skill deserved respect. Lyra's heart swelled with relief and pride. She had believed in Ethan from the start, and now the world around them had begun to see what she had always known. In the days following the trial, preparations for their union began. It was not an easy process. There were still those who resisted, who whispered that a human could never truly be a Valorian prince. But Lyra and Ethan remained steadfast, focusing on their connection and the future they could build together. Ethan continued to learn about Valorian culture and politics, impressing the council with his willingness to understand and adapt. Lyra, in turn, found herself drawn to his practical wisdom, his courage, and the simple sincerity that made him different from anyone she had ever met. Their bond deepened as they faced challenges together. They navigated political negotiations, assisted in military planning, and even worked to improve the lives of ordinary citizens who had long felt neglected by the nobility. The people began to see that this human was not a threat but a partner, someone who complemented Lyra's leadership rather than overshadowing it. Slowly, the city's perception began to shift, and whispers of doubt turned into conversations of admiration. The day of their official union arrived. The palace was decorated in shimmering banners, blending Valorian tradition with elements of human culture, a symbol of unity and the beginning of a new era. Citizens from all walks of life gathered to witness a moment they had once thought impossible. The princess, rejected by all, standing proudly beside a human who had earned his place not through power or birthright, but through courage, intelligence, and the simple choice to stand with her. As Lyra and Ethan exchanged vows, she looked into his eyes and felt the weight of everything they had endured. Rejection, doubt, fear, and uncertainty had brought them to this point. Yet in that moment, all of it faded away. She no longer felt the sting of being overlooked or underestimated. She had chosen, and she had been chosen in return. And that, more than anything, was proof of their strength. Ethan, for his part, spoke with quiet confidence, promising to stand by Lyra as an equal, to respect her leadership, and to face any challenge alongside her. His words were simple, but they carried weight. They were not declarations of power, but of partnership, a promise to face the unknown together. The crowd erupted into applause, their voices echoing across the city. Some cheered for the human who had defied expectations. Others celebrated the princess who had dared to choose her own path. And many, inspired by the union, began to hope that the old divisions of Valoria might one day fade, replaced by a world where merit, choice, and courage mattered more than lineage or prejudice. In the weeks that followed, Ethan and Lyra worked tirelessly to solidify their partnership. They traveled together, meeting leaders and citizens, learning from each other and showing that a human and a Valorian princess could lead together with respect, wisdom, and compassion. Their union became a symbol of a new era, an era where courage, intelligence, and heart were valued above bloodlines, where the improbable could become reality, and where the choices of individuals could reshape the future. As night fell over the twin suns of Valoria, Lyra and Ethan stood on the palace balcony, looking out over the city. The stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, and for the first time in her life, Lyra felt truly seen, truly accepted, and truly hopeful. She had been rejected by all, but in one human she had found not just a partner but a companion, a friend and an equal. And together, they would face whatever challenges the future might bring, side by side, hearts aligned, and spirits unbroken. Their story, once thought impossible, was just beginning, and the world would remember it not for the obstacles they faced, but for the courage to choose, to believe, and to stand together against all odds. Daniel had not expected to return to the Valerian capital. The memories of that distant day years ago felt more like a dream than reality. Back then, he had been a young diplomat, nervous and unsure, attending a ceremony that was more ritual than negotiation. It was a part of an alien tradition he had barely understood. A partnership ceremony where humans were asked to symbolically choose a Valyrian to honor as a partner. He had not thought deeply. He had only noticed her, a fragile girl with silver eyes and lavender skin, sitting in a hovering support chair that moved gently under her weight. Something about the quiet dignity in her eyes had drawn him. Without understanding why, he had extended his hand, offered her a flower, and smiled awkwardly. Everyone else had laughed softly, assuming he had chosen her out of pity. But the girl had smiled back, a smile so full of hope that it stayed with him long after the ceremony ended. After that day, their paths had diverged. Daniel returned to human space, buried himself in work, and tried to forget. He had assumed the ritual was meaningless, a fleeting moment in an alien culture that had no real significance. Yet now, standing in the Valyrian capital years later, he felt the weight of that memory as if it were a prophecy. He had been sent here as part of a new diplomatic mission, one designed to strengthen the alliance between humans and the Valyrians. Political tensions were high, and the palace was alive with activity. Guards marched in precise formation. Holographic banners shimmered above polished floors, and everywhere, diplomats from both sides whispered nervously about treaties and trade agreements. As Daniel entered the grand hall, his eyes were drawn to the far end, where the royal procession was about to begin. The room fell into silence as the Valyrian royalty approached. Their movements were elegant, their presence commanding, and at the center, on a floating exosuit that gleamed with golden light, sat the Valyrian princess. Daniel froze. The girl he had chosen all those years ago had grown into a woman of quiet strength, her silver eyes sharp and aware, yet still carrying the same warmth he remembered. She looked directly at him. Her voice, filtered through a translator, was steady, though it carried a note of emotion that made his heart skip. "Do you remember me? I'm the disabled alien princess you once chose as your partner." The hall went silent. Whispers spread like wildfire, some curious, some incredulous. Daniel's mind raced. He remembered the ceremony, the flower, the quiet hope in her eyes. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He felt a rush of guilt and surprise. How could she remember? How could she have carried that memory all these years? The princess raised her hand slightly, not in accusation, but as if to soothe him. "You didn't break the vow," she said softly. "You fulfilled it. I became strong, because I believed you would return." Daniel's eyes widened. He had not realized that the ceremony had meant more than he thought. The flower, the gesture, had been a promise, a bond he had unintentionally made. Now standing before her, he understood that she had not only remembered but had transformed that hope into her own strength. The Valyrian court was not quiet for long. Nobles whispered, some outraged that the princess would claim a human as her chosen partner, others intrigued by the bold statement of loyalty. Some even chuckled at the human's awkwardness, but the seriousness in the princess's eyes silenced them. The political implications were immense. If a human were officially recognized as her partner, it could shift alliances, upset hierarchies, and change power balances in ways few could predict. Before Daniel could gather his thoughts, the ground shook. An explosion ripped through one side of the palace, sending guards and attendants scattering. Smoke and debris filled the air and alarms blared. Daniel's instincts kicked in immediately. He darted forward, moving toward the princess even as others fled. He reached her just as her exosuit's shields activated, deflecting falling debris. The princess's voice was calm but firm. "Stay close, Daniel. We must move together." Her exosuit was no longer just a support device. It shimmered and shifted, transforming into a combat-ready frame, the arms and legs extending and rotating in precise mechanical movements. Daniel had trained in combat, but even he was impressed. The princess, once delicate and fragile, now moved with speed and precision that belied her years in a support chair. Enemies poured into the hall, armored and armed, their goal clear. They were extremists, intent on preventing the bond between human and Valyrian princess from forming publicly. Daniel and the princess exchanged a glance. They did not speak. Words were unnecessary. They had fought separately before, but now, together, they became a team. She directed him with quick hand signals and subtle gestures, taking down attackers with bursts of energy from her exosuit. Daniel relied on his human agility, throwing objects, diving behind pillars, and striking enemies in close combat. They moved as one, a human and an alien princess, complementing each other perfectly despite their differences. At one point, the princess's exosuit faltered, sparks flying from overloaded circuits. She staggered, her mechanical supports trembling under the strain. Daniel didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, scooping her into his arms. She was heavier than she looked, but he carried her as easily as if she were weightless, maneuvering through the chaos with determination. "You taught me strength," she said, her voice steady against the alarms and explosions. "Now let me guide you." Even in his arms, she directed him, pointing out enemy weak points, calculating angles and strategies with a mind sharper than most soldiers he had known. The attackers underestimated her, thinking her disability meant weakness, and that mistake cost them dearly. Together, they neutralized threats one by one, moving through the palace with a combination of precision and instinct. After what felt like hours but could have been minutes, the hall was finally secure. Smoke cleared, revealing the damage: shattered banners, scorched floors, and fallen debris. Yet the princess remained standing beside him, her exosuit still faintly glowing, her silver eyes unwavering. Daniel set her down gently. She looked at him, a mixture of gratitude and triumph in her gaze. "You stayed," she said. "You returned." He swallowed hard, realizing the depth of her words. It was not just about the ceremony anymore. She had waited, she had grown, she had endured hardships he could not imagine, and all of it had been for the bond they had shared in that brief moment years ago. He had returned, but more importantly, he had not abandoned her in spirit. The Valyrian court was silent again, but this time there was respect. Whispers of admiration and astonishment replaced ridicule and disbelief. The princess, once perceived as weak due to her disability, had shown everyone that true strength was not just in physical ability, but in determination, intelligence, and unwavering spirit. High-ranking Valyrians approached cautiously, curious and cautious. Daniel and the princess remained close, not out of necessity but as a sign of their mutual trust and growing partnership. Every step they took together sent a clear message. The human and the princess were united, not by ceremony alone, but by choice, courage, and shared experience. For Daniel, the realization was profound. He had underestimated the significance of a small gesture, a flower, a smile, but it had shaped destinies. Now, seeing the princess in all her strength and grace, he understood the depth of what had been entrusted to him all those years ago. This bond was no longer symbolic. It was real, tangible, and powerful enough to inspire change across the galaxy. As they stood in the center of the hall, Daniel's thoughts returned briefly to his past hesitation. He remembered the doubts, the fear of embarrassment, the uncertainty of choosing someone he barely knew. And he smiled. That moment of hesitation had led him here, to this confrontation of chaos, courage, and unexpected love. The princess, noticing his reflection, reached out and touched his arm lightly. It was a small gesture, but it carried reassurance, gratitude, and an unspoken promise. "We will face what comes next together," she said quietly. Daniel nodded, understanding that this was only the beginning. Political negotiations, personal challenges, and external threats would come, but he also understood that he would no longer face them alone. Together, human and princess, they could confront whatever the galaxy dared to throw at them. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt a sense of destiny, not imposed by tradition, not defined by ceremonies, but chosen freely and embraced fully. The princess, once perceived as fragile, had proven that strength came in many forms, and that the smallest decisions could echo across time and space. The hall, once filled with tension and doubt, now hummed with quiet energy. Those who had witnessed the events could not deny the human and the princess's connection, a bond forged in trust, courage, and choice. And as the sun's light filtered through the tall, crystalline windows of the palace, Daniel knew that the story of that day, the day he returned, and the day the princess revealed her strength, would be remembered for generations to come.